I'll just go, today's a general one. 2 weeks ago I just did fruit trees specifically. And then weekend before that, Greg did trees and mostly shade trees because he loves shade trees. So today we'll go through just quickly a few little principles, tools, different sprays, things like that. Then general rules of how to prune. And then we'll kind of get a little bit more specific on certain what I call rules of pruning. And then I'll kind of leave it at that and then answer any individual questions that you may have about certain fruit trees and that. So I'll just do a broad spectrum one today. To start off with, if you came a couple weeks ago, I always start off with tools. I don't spend too much time on it. Depending on how much time and effort you have, pruning, pruners, you'll have some there for $12, $14 all the way up to $140. I don't really use the $140 ones because I lose them so often in the dirt. I put them down. And they also don't like me telling you this, even though I'm the one that buys this stuff. I used to say take it out of the package and put it in your hand and imagine and kind of do that to see how it fits in your hand, because all of them feel very different in your hand. Some of them have larger heads, some have smaller heads. For the amount of pruning that I do, like this is actually quote unquote a ladies pruner, just because I have so many trees like this to prune that I find the larger head doesn't let me get in and around the tree as quick. I'm all about speed when there's 2,000 trees to prune. So don't go and judge me by when I go and talk about pruning at an angle and all this stuff. I may be off a little bit on some of the trees, but you'll do better than I have with your own individual trees. But take it out of the package, see what it feels like. If you have a great big yard and you're going to do lots of pruners or lots of pruning, and you're going to keep it and the kids aren't going to find it and they're not going to your husband's not going to use it as a cutter for wire and things like that, then by all means maybe you can go and buy the higher priced pair. But if it's just kind of like me, we just have a whole bunch of inexpensive pair around the house because my kids take them, my wife uses them, everything like that. So, and I'm notorious for losing them. When it comes to loppers, I didn't bring a pair here. Hopefully, the only time you use loppers is when you have taken over somebody's yard that has never been pruned before, or you have a whole bunch of roses, because it's really good to use loppers down in the roses and getting in there without being all shredded up by a rose bush. So that's the only time you use loppers. If you're starting off with young, small trees and you start training your tree from a young age, you should never have to use a lopper. You should really never have to use a saw, and God forbid that you actually have to use a chainsaw. That's not pruning. So, but if you've taken over a house in Brock or something, then there are circumstances where you might end up using some of these tools. Just quickly with the spraying, especially for fruit trees, but it also applies for trees and shrubs as well, and mugo pines. So this is your dormant spray. Most people know this. With all the restrictions on spraying, this is vital to the home gardener. Okay, not only for fruit trees, but like I mentioned, for roses, if you had powdery mildew, black spot, things like that, you can go and spray the lime sulfur on it. And it comes in a 2-pack. So dormant oil is your organic insecticide. What it does is it coats the eggs of your aphids and mites. Okay, and then the lime sulfur in it is your fungicide. So the powdery mildew and black spot, those type of things, fire blight on pears, all that kind of or fungicide problems, that's what the lime sulfur is for. There's always exceptions to the rule. So the lime sulfur in here shouldn't be used on what we call lime sulfur shy trees. Specifically fruit trees like apricots. Do not put your lime sulfur on that because you'll burn it. And then even the peaches and nectarines aren't excited about having lime sulfur, so you're better off to use a copper spray. Okay, and because copper won't burn like the lime sulfur does, but it is an organic fungicide. Okay. Also, if you're spraying dormant oil on, a lot of people will have scale on your Mugo pines. They'll look like they'll have snow still on them, or all scaly and that. So you want to spray, you can spray the dormant oil on a Mugo pine to coat those scale, to suffocate them and get rid of them. However, make sure it's not a bristlecone pine, which is what you paid the extra $100 for on the tree, because it has that white speckled look as well. And don't spray dormant oil on a blue spruce, because you'll be very unhappy with me, because it'll turn green. The other one that everybody gets hot to trot about is the pruning paste. Okay, there is nothing man-made that will heal a tree better than Mother Nature and the tree itself. So I'm not a big advocate of this. There'll be people that go around and paint every little cut they make. And what it actually does is it seals in the potential for rot inside. So you think you've done a really, really good job, did an amazing pruning cut, and then you seal it over, and all you've done is seal whatever bad there is right into the tree. And then 10 years down the road, tree falls apart, and you look down in the hole that were pruned, and it just ate itself out. Okay, so the only time that you would use this is on cuts that won't heal in a season. So anything larger than 2-3 inches of a cut, I wouldn't use. That's the only time I would use something like this. And even then I would go and paint it with whitewash, because this is black. You're better to put white latex paint on it so that it seals it, because in the winter what's happening, just like a bridge, is that constant contraction, expansion back and forth, and that's where the cracking gets into. Then the snow comes and works its way down into there. So like I mentioned, only use this on major big cuts. The only other thing is if you're having like raspberry cane borer, or you're having your roses have a borer where your flower's right there and then all of a sudden everything droops, then I would go and put that on your cuts, because it seals the cut in so that the borer can't get in. So I'm not a drawer, so you'll have to forgive me. So this is my stem, trunk of the tree, whatever it may be. This is my bud. When you go and do your pruning cuts, you want it at a 45-degree angle. Okay, so a lot of people will come along and they'll make their cut and they'll cut it right here. Right, so pretend that's my cut right at that angle. Well, it's at 45-degree angle, right? So no dew droplets or anything will sit on it. It kind of drips off. But there's not enough what I call meat or wood to sustain that bud. Okay, and I can guarantee you this bud will die, and the next bud is always going the opposite direction that you want it to. Okay, so yes, you made a 45-degree cut, but that's a little bit too much of an angle. Nothing will sustain it. So then other people, or those of us that are pruning very quickly, might do something like this. Okay, now you've left too much wood. And if you're pruning an apple tree, say for example, there's too much wood here that will actually cause rot. And rot on the tree will then work its way back down into the tree as years go by. So you do not want to have that much wood left over. What you're looking for, the ideal situation, is where the back side of your cut is at the top of the bud. So the back side of my cut here is parallel to the top of the bud, and that there has all this wood here to sustain any growth and sustain the bud. Okay, so that's the one principle that we need to know. Another principle is, I want to talk about Y crotching and U crotching. And this is more so for fruit trees and your shade trees. And it's as simple as what it sounds like. So this crotch right here is very narrow. That's a very weak crotch. So if you have a maple tree or if you have a fruit tree, those are the limbs that are going to either snap when they have a whole bunch of fruit on them, or they're going to be ending up on your car, your house. Okay, maples are very, very bad for that. Okay, whereas a U crotch, nice and strong, right? It will take a lot of weight. It's harder to take somebody's arm down even like this than versus if I'm like this, right? So we want to strive for that U crotch instead of a Y crotch. When the tree is young, very easy to do. A lot of people will go, and you might see it, they'll put sticks in it, right? It's still very pliable. This is why I say training a tree when it's young is very, very important. So doing something like that will develop that weak crotch into a strong crotch, into a Y crotch, or pardon me, a U crotch. So you can put a stick of wood in there. You'll see some people have nylons with rocks on them. Probably not the best nylons in your drawer, but ones that have little tears or whatever, sure. And they'll just weight them down, okay? And eventually, so if you just do that for one growing season, maybe two at the most, you'll have that branch trained into a stronger crotch like that, okay? The other thing is, if you look really, really closely at all the trees and branches, there's a ring here, okay? And when I talked about nothing will heal the tree better than the tree itself, where do you want to prune? You want to prune right on the outside of that ring, level and nice and flush with that ring. That ring is what grows over the wound that you just pruned, okay? I had a gentleman come in here. He was so excited. He showed me everything. And what he actually did is he took a sander to his tree after he pruned and made it nice and flush. Took off the ring and it never healed, right? So, and he did that, he had a lot of time obviously, but he mowed it right down. The tree was just a wreck, okay? So that's the other thing. Always prune on the outside of that ring, and you can see it, good example. I'm sorry for the back there, but you can see it right here. This is the ring that I'm talking about. Every branch, every stem has it coming out, okay? So you always want to just prune flush with that ring, not against the trunk, but just on the outside of that ring, okay? So that's another thing that you have to look for when you're doing it as well. And then something that I don't have to draw for you, a couple other simple rules, and that is what I would do if you've come in and you're overwhelmed because let's say you moved to Brock or somewhere and you have this overgrown cherry tree, or you moved into a house and it has a great big old maple tree and you're just not sure what to do with it. Luckily, they're all living things. Plants are living things. Unless it's already weakened and had disease and stuff before, most plants won't die from you pruning it. So they'll teach you what you're doing wrong, okay? So my advice is always, before you start, take a picture of whatever you're pruning before you do it, okay? And then take a picture about June again, because then you'll see where everything went budding out and everything and which way the branches went. Take it there and then take it again in the fall. And you'll see, it will show you all the growth stages of the tree, shrub, whatever it may be. But take a picture of it so you know what you may or may not have done wrong, okay? The other thing is you kind of need to know what you're pruning, okay? And if you're not 100% sure what you're pruning, you can usually bring in a sample of wood and we can tell you what it is. You also don't want to prune a shade tree, for example, like a fruit tree. And this is something that I've seen horribly throughout Kamloops. It just drives Greg nuts because he used to be the city arborist and he would painstakingly do the trees and prune the trees properly, and then he's retired now, and then you have the younger generation and things going on where they just go, they prune it like a fruit tree. So pruning a shade tree like a fruit tree makes the shade tree very, very weak. So you have to go, what I'm basically saying is, what is the purpose of your pruning job? Okay, do I want that prize-winning rose? So do I want one great big perfect rose that I can take to the fall fair, or do I want a whole bunch of rose flowers for everybody to see? I don't care about the big perfect one. Do I want to prune this tree for fruit production, or do I want to prune this tree for shade? Those are the type of things that you need to know before you go into and approach anything that you're doing. The worst thing to do is talk to your neighbor, because they're always wrong. And it's always a competition too. So it's always a competition of who's going to make who look like the fool. Like I mentioned, know what you're pruning and what the purpose of your pruning job is. So I want to start off with, it can be quite overwhelming too, of if you have this, and I keep always focus on cherry trees. I don't know why, but if you have this great big old cherry tree with all the cherries up top, and you just don't know what to do with it, you should take a picture of that, bring it in, and we can help you. But there are going to be some circumstances where you as a homeowner, it's just above your abilities to do. And something like a big old cherry tree, there's not too much bringing it back to where you need it to be. Okay, so that's why it's really, really important when the tree is young to pay attention to it. Okay, whether it be a shade tree or fruit tree, if you're buying a maple tree, you can see that the branches are opposing, meaning that so a lot of trees and shrubs will do this. Dogwoods will have this, maples have this, where you have two buds opposing like so. Instead of one bud alternating and the next bud will be down here and the next one will be over there, the opposing bud situation are, like I said, on maple trees, dogwoods, where both of these take off. Okay, so when the tree is, so this is the problem, and I should mention this too. Remember I talked about that ring, okay? So when the tree is young, ideally what you do, and you have to head back the shade tree, right? You have to decide who's number one. So in every tree, one branch is always higher, okay? So, and you'll notice right here, this is a peach, but let's pretend it's just a shade tree. But this one always has to be number one, or this one always has to be number one. What's happening here is they're both competing to be number one. What happens when a tree competes, or anything competes to be number one? Two of those opposing branches now become from Y crotches to, from U crotches to Y crotches, because they're going like this to grow straight to be number one. There's always a hormone sent back, okay? Whether it be a pine tree, spruce tree, shade tree, fruit tree, anything, there's always a number one. No, not every branch gets a winning prize. I'm sorry, that's not real life in the fruit tree industry or anything. If you don't eliminate one of these, then you're going to have a very bad situation. That's where it's going to pinch right out. And that Y crotch, it's easier to do when the tree's young, because what's happening, that ring, don't mean to turn my back to you, sorry. What's happening as the tree grows older and it's a Y crotch, if you took an X-ray, those rings are actually growing in like this. Okay, and you see on that tree, the branch that's lower is actually more prolific than the one that's supposed to be dominant, because it's actually choking out. It's kind of growing into the center of the tree, slowing down. So think all the nutrients are going straight up. It's like a freeway. If this wasn't blocking it, it would keep growing faster, right? But that second branch is growing in. Now everything's going around. So it slows down and it impedes the growth. So it becomes number one. So that's why it's important, one, when the tree's young, to make that Y crotch into a U crotch. So guess what? Because then the freeway returns and everything keeps going up. but if it's a wide crotch, it impedes it. When the branches get 2-3 inches wide and thick, very, very hard to do. And if you let it go and go and go, what happens is it actually pinches out. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Happens a lot in parking lots. You can go to Aberdeen Mall and see the trees basically pinching out the top growth, and that's what's going to fall over on the car in the windstorm, because it's just literally pinched right out. So that's why I keep saying you have to do that. When it's young and you're taking a leader, when the tree's young, like this, and you're going to head it back, knowing that it has opposing buds, what you do is what we call rub out. And you'd actually rub one of those buds out so that the other one can grow up straight. If you don't rub it out on a tree or a shrub that has an opposing bud, then you have competing buds or branches eventually. Okay, so that's why I'd much take over a yard that has a younger tree than an older tree. And the last one too is you need to know when you're pruning. I talked about that as well, of not only why and the purpose of you pruning, but the timing of the pruning. Okay, so there again, we have, I call it the lilac rule. So when we talk about shrubs, anything that, as a general rule, because there's a lot of new variety of plants that bear on new and old wood, but we'll just, as an overall general purpose, the lilac rule is anything that flowers before a lilac, including the lilac, flowers on old wood, meaning wood that grew last year. Okay, so if you go out there all excited because your neighbor's pruning and you need to prune, and you had a forsythia, for example, and you prune it down right today and get rid of everything, and then it doesn't flower, well, you know that it flowered on old wood, and you'll have to wait now another whole year before you get any more flowers. So, and that's where the picture thing comes into effect too. If you take a picture of the plant and you know that it flowered last year, but this time it doesn't, well, now you know, there again, flowered on old wood. But a general rule is anything that flowers before the lilac, including the lilac, flowers on old wood. So this is a lilac bush, and I'm sure if you went down anywhere on the lower river valley here, they're all sitting here. So these are the buds that are going to flower for you. Okay, they sat there all summer, all fall, all over winter, and are ready to give you a show this year. So things like, obviously, the lilac, forsythia, there are bridal wreath spirea, for example, okay, that flower all on old wood. Sistina plums, flowering almonds, all that stuff. Anything that flowers after the lilac. So summer flowering shrubs, for example, flower on new wood, meaning wood that will grow this year. Okay, so your hydrangeas is a prime example. Everybody loves hydrangeas now, especially since they are so many different colors and different heights, but they will flower during the summer. Okay, so there again, potentilla, you can't kill potentilla, so potentilla, different types of spirea, like magic or carpet spirea, gold mound spirea, all those type are flower summering plants. Okay, so if you want to prune them out there today and mow them right down, and the more new growth you have, the more growth you'll get and the more flowers you'll get. Okay, like I mentioned, if you do these ones now, you won't have any flowers. Okay, and speaking of energy, we need to remember that pruning invigorates. Okay, so if I prune something, you're going to get more growth off of it. So if you have a sucker on a rose, for example, and you go and prune the rose, sucker off, right? Guess what's going to happen? You're going to invigorate more suckers. Pruning invigorates. So if we have a branch, let's say this, an lopsided tree, and we want to shape the tree nice and make it look pretty. So this one is 5 feet long. This one's 2 feet long. Hard to do. Which one do you prune harder? The shorter one. It messes with my brain quite a bit. But yeah, you prune this one harder and leave this one. Because what happens? It invigorates and will push growth to match this one. If you go the natural tendency is to prune this one back to balance it out, right? Well, now you've just created a situation where this one at the end of the season will be farther along than this one again. So, and if you're pruning suckers, so suckers on roses, and it will be happen. Actually, I'll show you on the fruit tree. Roses, most roses, like your hybrid teas, floribundas, grandifloras, they all have grafts. Your shade trees have grafts. Your fruit trees have grafts. And this is the graft. It's the knot, right? They put the best of the top of whatever you want. I want the best peach, and they put it on a hardy rootstock. Bang, there you go. Okay, same with roses. They want a hardier rootstock or rootstock to survive the camelus area, but you want the pretty flower, so they put it together. That knot, that graft, that union, anything that flowers or anything that's growing underneath that is a sucker. That's the rootstock. And I can guarantee you that sucker grows faster and stronger than the rest of the plant. And they're no different than the branching with the wide crotch. It takes all the energy out of the rest of the plant, so it slows the plant that you want. The plant that you spent $50 on, that prize-winning rose, and guess what? It's not going to live because it's all the energy to the root is going. And usually they're like a Persian yellow, like they're all thorny. They're a different color wood, everything like that. So, unfortunately, let's say that sucker has grown, and it's 4 feet tall, and you're faced with that this year right now in your yard. What you want to do, you're going to have to prune it off because it's so big. But in June, early part of June, you're going to notice that where there's one sucker, 2 little branches have come out. And that's where we talked about rubbing off the bud, but you're going to actually rub off the sucker. Okay? You're not going to prune the sucker. You're going to break it off. And I don't mean like break it off and tear it down the trunk or down the stem or down the rootstock. What it wants to do is wiggle it back and forth and break it. By doing that, it kind of in essence basically ends the dormant buds that are there to create the suckers. Okay, so then you won't have the problem anymore. Okay, because you've broken it off, and then energy reverts back into the main part of the tree. If you're talking about flowering crabs, as a shade tree, same family as our apples. In the middle of summer, you'll see all these branches going straight up, okay? And those are what we call water sprouts, basically suckers, okay? And those suckers are taking all the energy from the rest of the tree. You're not getting any fruit production or anything off of those. They go straight up, okay? If you have an old apple tree that's doing this, that's been pruned differently from before, and it's just has all this vegetative growth, that's a big project, okay? That's a 3-year project because, like I said, if you have thumb width branches or even bigger, sometimes if you went out to the pear tree out back there, they can be even that big, right? And they're going straight up. So you have to prune them off, but you have to come back in June and rub off those suckers. If you don't do that, what happens is where you have 1, you have 2, where you had 2, you had 4, and it just multiplies and multiplies. But when you have a great big old pear tree, apple tree, flowering crab that has all that, and it's been there for 15 years, and you have all this wood, if you go and prune it down today, right now, all of those water sprouts, you're going to create a bigger problem than you had before. Because all that pruning invigorates even more, right? You got to think about it. The root ball, the root mass in the tree is just going to push and pump everything right up, okay? So you want to prune out 1/3 every year. So it's another rule that I have, whether it be a mock orange, because mock orange is the same kind of thing as a tall flowering shrub. The 1/3 rule is it's going to take you 3 years to get that back into shape. You prune out 1/3 of those water sprouts year after year, remembering that in June, you have to come back and rub off those little sprouts coming. And then in the summertime in June as well, you might take some of the growth on those water sprouts back by half on the other 1/3, okay, just to slow the tree down. But it's a 3-year cycle. Hopefully you can all kind of envision that, okay? So those are some of the rules, the lilac rule, the what to do with the water sprout rule. The other rule that I have, if you're going to prune, prune. The worst thing you can do, the absolute worst thing you can do is go and like, okay, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I'll take a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Worst thing in the world to do. I get accused that I'm a heavy-handed pruner, rightfully so, because I'm trying to balance the top growth versus the roots in the new tree. But this thing, doing that, creates what I call the moose antler effect, okay? And it's horrible, especially if you have a shade tree and you're trying to do that, okay? Especially if it's a maple and you're trying to do that. You've created all this wood up top, all this weak wood up top, going like this in a 40, 50 mile an hour wind. What do you think is going to happen eventually, right? So even with this dogwood, doing this, you've created a situation where all the growth is up here. People come to me all the time and they go, well, I have no leaves, no flowers down here. My dogwood, mock orange, forsythia, they all have everything up high, right? So now, when I was a little boy, everybody planted those, like a flowering almond, Sestina plum in front of their basement window, right? And what I'm talking about is this type of thing. So pretend this is any of those plants that I mentioned ahead of time. Let's just stick with dogwoods to make it easy. And if you just keep pruning here, this is what's happening, right? Everything's up here. All your vegetative growth, all the flowers are up here, your window's in behind here, or whatever, and people can see right through. That's not why you planted it there, right? So, this is the other part of the 1/3 rule when you have something like this. So every year, and this is a dogwood, so it's flowering on new wood. Okay, a little different if it's mock orange with flowering on old wood. You have to make a decision, like I said earlier, why am I pruning this today? Okay, is it to get back into shape? Do I want leaves from the ground up? I'll sacrifice some flowers. Okay. So let's see, even if it's a mock orange. The 1/3 rule is today you go out there and you prune back all the way to the ground, 1/3 of the shrub, all the way out. Okay, right down to the ground. Okay, and except for the roses and most most roses will be grafted, right? The nice thing about flowering shrubs, most of them are what we call in their own root. You won't find a knot anywhere on there, right? So what the root is what the plant is. So you can go and prune it right back down, and what's coming out of the ground is your new growth of what the plant is, okay? If you did that to a rose that's grafted, we can all guess that you're going to get the rootstock coming up, which is not what you want. But going back to this, the 1/3 rule is this. So what's going to happen is the new growth, so you maintain that height because you want to, let's say 6 feet high to keep your neighbors out from seeing, but they can see anyways because everything is bald in the middle here. So what will happen through the season is you'll have this new growth occurring, and it will be all vegetative. So then it hides the bare wood that is flowering up here. Okay, so you have vegetative here, growth here, you still maintain your flowers. And then what happens, I'll run out of colors, maybe. So in spring of 2006, you go and prune that out, leaving the blue. Those will grow, right? These flower, these grow, maintaining the height of the shrub, but now you have a full shrub from the ground up, vegetative growth all through here. Flowers here is why you bought the shrub, right? and you don't have that moose antler effect. So just doing this, you're going to have a naked shrub down below and everything up top. And that's not what most people want. Okay, so that's what you do with that. So that's my other 1/3 rule when it comes to flowering shrubs. So in this case, I'll just quickly show you. Most of the, if this is my dogwood, and when you approach anything, okay, so this is probably the most important thing that you need to listen to. You take that picture, you step back, you know why you want to prune it, but you can get overwhelmed. So this is the part, the 4 Ds kind of thing. Diseased, dead, dying, and then I don't know why I put it in with the D, but anything crossing or rubbing like that, you eliminate those. Oh, that's why. Directional. There you go. So the direction of the branch. Okay. Once you've taken that out, so anything diseased, crossing, anything rubbing, anything growing to the center, anything broken, things like that, most of the time you're like 95% done there. Okay, so it's gone from very overwhelming to, oh, I've cleaned that out. Then you go and, okay, why did I prune it? For the shape, okay, I want the flowers, okay. I need fruit production, so if it's a fruit tree that you're pruning, a little bit more work, a little bit more effort. We won't dwell too much on it, but like on a peach tree, it produces fruit on wood that grew last year, only that 1-year-old wood. So, and you have to know where the fruit tree is bearing fruit. Okay, so on a peach tree, for example, a nectarine, they will produce in the middle 2/3. So if you go and prune back 2/3, you're not going to get, on the branches that are left, you're not going to get any fruit. Okay, and I should mention here too, and this is if you're not sure what you're doing, I always say slower your roll, let the plant start to grow. Okay, because a lot of times you take a rose bush and it's going to die back. There's some dieback on this one already, but there's a line on the stems. So on the stem, it will be a very, very faint line on the shrubs. You can see it on the dogwoods where they're opposing. You can see the lines right through the stem. If you can't see the lines, that's why I always say wait, let Mother Nature start growing, and then you can start seeing if there's any buds developing. Okay, and then that shows you a couple things. One is, okay, all this is dead, so I got to prune back to at least these growing buds, right, on a rose. The other one is I can see which way the bud is going to grow. So the bud's facing that way is to the outside of my shrub, so that's the way I want it to go. Oh no, I want it to go this way, so I'll prune it this way. Okay, and that's the other thing on opposing ones. Like I said, you'd rub that one off and you prune it like that. If you want it to go that way, you go that way, right? So just stay calm and let it grow a little bit, and then you'll know what's happening. But when it comes to your fruit tree production, like I said, I'm not going to dwell on that, but you're looking for different buds. So the fruit is produced on our flower buds, and our flower buds look like that. If you come here and look really closely in the 2/3 part of this branch, you'll see fat buds. Okay, they look just like this, and that, maybe not just like this. This is probably a better drawing than what it actually is there. But so it looks just like that, and that's where you're going to get your fruit production. Okay, so there again, if you're waiting a little bit and it starts to push for you, you can see, okay, it's flowering here, it's at nice fat buds. That's where my fruit production is. Guess what? I'm going to prune up only by 1/3. I'm not going to come back in the 2/3 and take out all the production. Okay, so that's why you kind of need to know what kind of buds you're going to. And then if you look at the tip, there's a single bud. So that single bud is your branch bud, for a lack of a better word. and that's where the growth is going to happen for the branch, and you'll get the fruit in here. Okay, so this is kind of like, for lack of a better word, a 3-bud situation is where your fruit is. A single bud is your branch bud. Okay, and letting the tree grow and showing you where things are is better way to go about it, especially when you're first starting out, because then you know exactly how it's growing. As a general rule, with all shrubs and fruit trees and shade trees, you want it to grow to an outside bud. Always out from the center of the tree. Okay, that's not to say that you can not manipulate Mother Nature, in that if the neighbor's kid jumped the fence and broke this branch, okay, and now it's really off-sided, you can take some of these branches, take one of these buds and have it grow back this way to fill the void and the gap. So you can manipulate how the tree is growing by knowing which buds will grow where. Okay. So I'll just quickly go back to this dogwood just to show you, and then I'll kind of get into evergreens a bit. So like I mentioned, don't go doot, but you come back into the old wood. Now, the old wood will be a different color, usually a darker, gnarly, gray, that type of thing. In this situation, it's more, instead of being a bright yellow, it will be more of a green. So, and then I have this thing doing whatever it's doing. So I'm going to want to maintain my height, except for I want to clean out some of this here, okay, and come back. And so when I talk about, you want to eliminate whole branches, okay, but maintain the height all the way through, okay. And I'm just doing basically the same principle, and that is anything broken, disease, going the wrong direction, right? Crossing, like these are crossing and rubbing. Okay, and then this doesn't make any sense, right? Really, it's going to grow down, okay? In an apple tree, for example, Gravestine apples are horrible. It just wants to wilt right down. So if I prune to an outside bud, what am I doing? I'm forcing the branch even lower down. So on a Gravestine apple, for example, you'd prune to an inside bud because you want the branch to come up, okay? So just do that. I'm not going to get leaves on here, but I'm forcing growth from here up to hide all this, okay? And then I would just go back like this, there again, to an outside bud, like so. Like is it? Don't look at how close I'm doing it. So, and I've just kind of cleaned it up. I have lots of airflow, right? So that's another thing, especially with roses and such. You want airflow, okay? So you don't get powdery mildew and such. So I have lots of airflow. In fruit trees, you want the center open, lots of airflow, lots of sunlight to actually produce fruit for you, okay? So that's a simple one with that. If you want to take a hydrangea, and this is probably a good, Sean's having fun with me. So I usually look at it and go, okay, this is how I'll do this. And now she just throws me one like this. So, so this is what I'm talking about. And this is another thing. Sometimes that rose hedge, the hydrangea hedge, the mock orange, it's just way out of control, right? And we talked about the 1/3 rule, right? And they'll take 3 years. But sometimes, like if you look at this, there again, it has that moose antler effect. Everything's up here, right? So sometimes you just have to rejuvenate, right? And start over. And so if you have took over a yard that has been planted, never been pruned, right? And you want it, not sure where to begin. Now remember, this is not on a rootstock, right? The hydrangea is true to form, okay? So then that's what we call rejuvenating. And if I have more time, what I do is I would just come in here and prune out some of that to thin it out. But now think about this. You have all this root mass here, going to shoot all this growth up for you this year. Okay, so you're going to get a whole new shrub with a whole bunch of flowers on it. Okay, but you do want to thin this out a little bit more in here, just so it's not so gnarly. Okay. I'll just briefly talk about fruit trees, then I'll talk quickly about evergreens. So this is a cherry tree on standard rootstock. Okay. So this tree has the potential of being 40, 50 feet tall, all the cherries at the top, right? So you may look at this and go, well, gee, Maury, like there's no branches on it, like, and you want me to spend $100 for it? Do. This is another thing that everybody needs to remember. If the branch branches from here, it always stays 2 feet from the ground, right? If the branch is 4 feet from the ground, it's 4 feet from the ground. Okay, the branch does not grow with the tree. Okay, so if this is my cherry tree, and I know it has the potential to grow this high, and it's no different than a house. If you're a half an inch or an inch out on the foundation, by the time you get to the second or third floor, where are you at? Your feet out, right? Same thing with the tree. So I want to sell the tree, but ideally what I would want to do, and the only reason it's this tall is because you'll look at me and say $100 for this right here. But when I take it home, I'm going to prune it right there because I have all these buds here and I want 4 main branches, and I'm starting lower, and the lower I start, then I get my fruit down, right? And I won't have that situation 40 feet tall because I'm going to take it from when it's young and have it nice and low branches. Okay, so you're actually going to have branches in this area. So that's what I would do with the whip on a cherry tree, on a standard cherry tree. And I know you all want me to do that, but I'm not going to do that. On a peach tree, and there again, we have, like I mentioned, you need to know what you're doing because cherry trees produce on 2-3-year-old wood, right? So I want to maintain that. Apples and pears produce on spurs, that fruit. The more horizontal the branches, the more fruit you get, the more flowers you get, all that kind of fun stuff. Okay, so I want those branches to be very much like this. And most homeowners will want a tree like an upside down umbrella for fruit production. Okay, but the spurs on those trees are long lived. From day 1 to day 40, 45 years from now, they'll produce for you. Okay, so you don't want, the spurs are the ones that a lot of people eliminate because guess what? They're always the ones that are rubbing you when you're in there pruning and you're getting all scraped up. These little things right here, all the way through here, these little nubs are your spurs. Okay, that's what's going to fruit for you. Okay, so you don't want to eliminate those either. You don't want to go because you'll get no fruit. So apples, pears, and I think I wrote it in there. Apples, pears produce on spurs, long lived. Cherries on year wood, that's 2, 3, 4 is the most productive. Japanese plums and Italian plums, honestly, once they're set for after 10 years, you don't really have to prune them too much. Okay. Apricots, why you'd want an apricot, I have no idea. But if you want an apricot, I'm biased. That was my job when I was a little boy, picking up apricots off the ground. Oh, and then plus when we canned, we always had like 3 cans of apricots. We had to eat apricots before, 2 cans of apricots before we could have the peach can or the pear can, which is what everybody wanted, right? So yeah, I have trauma from that if you can't tell. Anyways, it taught me some things though, apparently. Where was I? So apricots will produce, there again, depending on the variety, you'll have some varieties producing on the tips, right? So if you prune back a third, you're not going to get any apricots. Most of them will produce like peaches and nectarines in that middle 2/3. Like I mentioned, the peaches and nectarines produce on last year's wood. So this tree here, this is a peach. If you have a peach at home, you take a picture of it. By the time you're done pruning, 60 to 70% of that tree should be gone every year. Okay, once the foundation of the tree is done, right? So this is the other thing is when the trees are young like this, forgo the fruit, work on the foundations. Most trees will have 2, 3, 4 branches, main ones like this. Okay, and these are your structure branches, usually like 1, 2, and 3, nicely spaced. You take out all this stuff, and these are the ones that are going to be long-lived that you're going to keep. And then from these ones, that's where you're going to start producing or pruning for production of fruit. Okay, and those are the ones that you're going to eliminate right back year after year for back to these main branches. Okay, if that makes any sense. So here we have 2 competing ones. Like I said, I decide, like I said, don't look at my pruning. I got to sharpen these. So that eliminates the competition. I'll come back down in here, do that. So now the other thing you have to remember is what? Yeah, 1/3. So peaches dehydrate quite easily in the Kamloops area. Okay, so it's impossible for this tree to sustain all this wood. That's why when I say you're going to have 60 to 70% of that tree gone, I mean it. It's even more so for this tree because this tree is just potted up, okay? And it's treated with sulfur, which dries out the wood. So if you go outside and look at all the peaches that I've pruned so far, you'll see what's going to happen here. So I do prune a little bit heavier than others just because of that situation. So, but if this is my tree when I'm young and I'm trying to develop the framework, so I go back there. Now I'm going to want another whirl, so that's why I'm keeping this one. Okay, so if you noticed how much wood I had before, and that's probably about 60 to 70% of what the tree's left. Okay, but this is what I want when I'm buying a tree like this, because these are my framework branches, right? Then you get into the production of the tree. Evergreens. Evergreens are a little bit different. They develop on candles on pines, and we'll see this. So you'll have this type of thing sometimes. So on a pine tree, you'll have like literally they're about 6-inch candles, right? On spruce trees, you'll have a whorl at the tips of the branches. So if that's my branch, like I said, and you'll have this type of thing coming, right? Mostly 3, but sometimes 4. Okay, and they'll be all droopy. Okay, so the time to prune evergreen is just as the growth is starting to firm up, because these candles will be limpy too, and they'll start coming up. You just nip them in half. You can't do more than a half. Okay, so evergreens is really important here. So if you want that matted lush effect, and you'll see a lot of, in the old days we used to sell a juniper called Golden Fitzer, right? And super drought tolerant, super tough as nails, goldy color, but it used to grow huge. And people would have their walkways or driveways and plant it beside the driveway in a 2-foot space, and then it reaches over the 2 feet and it gets onto their driveway. People do it even now. So you can't stop the plant from growing, okay, especially when it comes to evergreens. So you can't stop it from growing. So you have to, from day one, even though it hasn't got to the driveway yet, you have to go, if that's my driveway and I planted my little whatever here, from day one you have to prune it and shear off half of that growth year after year in May, June. If you let it grow to the driveway and then start shearing it, what happens is this out here becomes, the shrub becomes very matted on the outside of it, right? but inside it's dying out. So then you got this blanket on the outside, and you can see the brown dead on the inside. We don't want that. So from day one, buy the right size evergreen to fit the spot, okay? So, because you cannot stop it. So even in this case, you're going to be growing like 2 to 3 inches year after year. So eventually after 20 years, it's going to be on your driveway regardless. And then what lots of people will do, so lots of people will wait till it gets there, and that's the horrible thing to do. So from day one, evergreens should be pruned. 2, if it gets to that situation, you can see on when you go into MacArthur Island, if it's still there, there's a golden fitzer, and there's only 2 things that you can do once the juniper has gotten out there, because all the foliage is out here and the inside is brown and dead. And what do they do to it? They make it into a topiary, right? So that's the one where they have all the balls here and there, right? Because that's all you can do, because all the growth is out here. So that's all they've done. Or you hook it up to the pickup truck and yank it out and start again. That's kind of the only 2 scenarios. So from day one, 3 things: choose the right evergreen. 2, prune it from day one. You prune it just as the growth starts to firm up. You take half of that growth. On your cedar hedge, which are all going to be yanked out anyways by the sounds of it, you always have to have a slight pyramid shape in that the bottom of your cedar hedge is always wider than the top. It needs as much sunlight as the top, but what happens is in this scenario, the sun is not getting to the bottom, and you'll notice that what is happening, this is dying out, okay? The other one is, what happens nowadays is you have this as a cedar hedge, right? That 6 feet up, and the deer have mowed it down, okay? So unfortunately, all you can do is come back and prune in here. You put some netting around it farther out and try and keep the deer off. Honestly, even deer resistant plants are going to be eaten. I live on the back of the mountain, and I have junipers and everything that they're not supposed to eat, and they still mow them down, okay, when they're hungry. So it's just the nature of the beast. The thing that I wanted to mention was, and the reason why I said prune from day one, take a pine tree, and I think we all know that where shrubs, fruit trees, deciduous trees will come back when they've been pruned into dormant wood. Evergreens won't come back in dormant wood, right? If they cut a tree down in the forest, right, it's not coming back up. So the same thing applies to you at home. So, but what you can do, and a good example is a mugo pine. So let's say you planted that mugo pine along the driveway. A mugo pine, like a regular mugo pine, is going to get 6 by 6. You've let it go 6 by 6, and now it's on your driveway, but you don't want to pull it out. So what you can do is this type of situation. From here, basically, down is all bare, right? That's what most, and all the needles are up here. So if you prune back into here, nothing's going to come, and it's just a dead stick. It looks horrible. So what you can do, the only thing you can do is go back to the last little bit of green growth here, okay? And you can prune back to that last little green growth. There always has to be little green growth. Same with a cedar, okay? And I'll talk to you about a second in that. But as a general rule in Kamloops, because we're so dry and have no humidity, you only can prune back an evergreen back to the last green growth. And then what will happen is that will shoot new growth for you. And then what you do the year after that is come back into and prune that right back again. So now you've taken something like this, you're going to reach down in there to the last green growth, prune it down there, and you've eliminated that height. It will shoot more growth, and then you go the year after that and go back down to the second to last green growth and prune that right out. Okay, and that will bring down your mugo pine. When it comes to cedar hedges and yews, you sometimes can prune into dormant wood. Okay, you can prune back down in there, If the deer have eaten into here, you might have noticed it's flushed out again. And that's why when it's out of shape like that, you can bring in the top and go into dormant wood. But I really encourage you that you have to go and spray and mist that wood, okay, to keep it very pliable, because you're into dormant wood. It doesn't always happen, so it is a risk in Kamloops because we're so dry that that dormant wood won't push new growth again, even if you're misting it. Places like the shoe shop, like out at Chase or up in Barrier, I've seen it successfully done where they've pruned right back into dormant wood on cedars and on yews, not pines and spruce. I just want to make sure that have pruned right back into the dormant wood, but it's pliable enough and it's humid enough that they've actually shot new growth. So you can maintain that cedar hedge, remembering that the bottom has to be just slightly wider than the top. Okay. If you have a 20-foot cedar hedge and they're still letting you have it, but you need to bring it down, you'll get 3 to 4 flushes, 3 flushes for sure on a cedar hedge in Kamloops. Same with junipers. The first flush will be in June, which is your main one, and then you'll get a couple ones through the summer. As a general rule, I should also say this too. All pruning, no matter what you're pruning, should be done by the end of July in Kamloops for everything. And the reason for that is that you want it to harden off before winter. Now our falls have gotten quite warm and dry, and it seems like everything's growing right out into the end, but I never prune past the end of July, because if we get a cold snap early, that growth may not harden off, and what's going to happen? You're going to end up pruning again early in the spring because it's died back. On bleeder trees, there's always exceptions. So maples, birch, and walnuts are what we call bleeding trees. Okay, so everything else you can do when it's dormant at this time of year when the sap's starting to flow. If you go to a maple tree or the bleeder trees and prune today, right? Oh, Maury said I could prune my maple. And no, I didn't say that. You don't want to prune the bleeders till they're dormant. Okay, now Greg and I will say on that sheet, I did read that sheet. Greg is a little different than me. He'll do a light pruning and I'll do a light pruning on smaller shade trees, and I do it here in the middle of summer because there's not so much growth happening. You don't want to do the bleeders like a maple or a walnut now because there's so much energy that's going to come. If you went out there and pruned it, you'll see that they are actually weeping sap right out of them. Okay, so a light pruning for the bleeders in summer, heavy pruning if you're going to do a heavy pruning, that actually wants to be done in December, early January, okay, before we start getting any growth happening. Okay, and we always get a cold snap there in January or February, so you have to be careful of that one. But that's when you do the bleeders. Oh, the last thing I'll say about evergreens, like I said, and you might notice that sometimes, so there used to be a really cool one going out to Rayleigh between the CN tracks and the highway, and it was a perfect lightning strike hit the top, and it became the moose antler effect, right? Because what did I say? Even in evergreens, one has to always be the leader. So what happens? Your neighbor jumps the fence and breaks the top, and you'll see it on the Christmas trees as well. You'll see that there's sometimes a bamboo stick at the top of the tree where you put your angel or star or whatever it may be at the top, okay? And that's because one of the central leader guy broke. If you have spruce borer, you'll notice that the top of your tree will die down and they're right in that. You want to prune it out. But what happens, like I said, you'll get this, there again, a moose antler effect. If the center one is broken out and gone, all the other branches come straight up. And that creates a real weak situation. So what you want to do from day one, and because it develops in a whirl like this, so picture that, you actually have to pick one. You take the bamboo stick and you pull one of those up when it's still pliable. You pull it up and you tie it to the bamboo stick, and then what happens? That becomes number one. If you don't do that on an evergreen, like I said, everybody goes like this, okay? So pick one when it's young, and you might actually have to go and prune off some of those other ones in the world to make it number one. But as a general rule, as soon as you see that break, you can go and pull one up, put bamboo for 1 year here and here, and make it more pliable to come up. So.